To me, it seems that what artists do, and McLuhan had a great term for this, he called them probes, is that artists like Shaman, what they do is they go probing outside of the epistemic field that's been properly contoured and mapped out by a particular polity. So we're living in the society. There's certain things that are plausible, certain things are implausible, certain things are acceptable, certain things aren't acceptable. But of course, since we live in an infinite universe of infinite granularity, the chances that our particular model of a real is actually accurate over time, the chances are nil. So we know that's not the case. And yet, even when I say an epistemic model, I mean that our thoughts, our vocabulary, our conceptual vocabulary is that overlay that we're using to map the world. And so we can't even think our way out of it. Everything, we can try to think your way out of an epistem, but you're just bringing those thoughts with you. You're bringing it with you everywhere you go. So what you need are people who can, through intuition, through leaps, through the imagination, through image as opposed to concept, an image here, using the term broadly to include sonic images, tactile images, just pure kind of aesthetic, imaginal stuff, are able to probe the outside. And so that's an essential function if you want to have a viable and sustainable sort of society. So it's very important that there are people who test the boundaries and go looking beyond and proclaim to transcend certain categorical distinctions which are thought to be essential, natural, cosmic, and preordained by the rest of the people. And it's also natural and essential that people resist these individuals who do this. You'll see this in the animal kingdom, right? You'll have a male trying his best to mate with the female, just making him run through a bunch of hoops and makes all kinds of jumps and build a little stage, do a little dance like those birds do in order to earn the right to. So the idea is that rejection is just automatic, reflexive, and essential. So you have to reject that. Mm-hmm. You have to associate the artist with mental illness, which is quite unfair, I think, in many cases. But the point is, you have to do that in order to create the tension necessary for the right stuff to come to the fore. And one of the problems I have with modern post-war society is the deployment of the aesthetic and the aesthetic was always a factor in political control and economic control, but the scale on which it's happened since Hiroshima with television and advertising and stuff, and now with the embroilment or the entanglement or it's the word I'm looking for, the kind of complicity of the artist in the kind of cycles of production that perpetuate a particular epistemic model instead of testing it. What we have here is what I've been calling artifice. And all the more reason for artists to be able to go and explore those uncharted territories, but it's getting harder and harder to find those for all kinds of reasons. So that's what I would say. And the goal of all this is, of course, all of this is predicated on the idea that we don't know the future and that our choices and decisions matter. So we want to have works that can guide us. And we know that's been happening. For example, if you look at science fiction and its influence on actual aerospace engineering, it's huge. A lot of aerospace engineers were huge science fiction fans. And so in being exposed to these ideas and seeing how artists could take existing technology and kind of amplify or transform it into forms that were not yet imaginable to the actual engineers, that art actually helps us imagine and choose futures. And so that might just be a purely phenomenal thing. It might have nothing to do with the real reality. If the future is already set, it doesn't really matter. But insofar as we have to get up in the morning and do stuff, I think that's a good way of approaching art and its usefulness to a society.
Well, I totally agree with that. Yeah, you have to look at it up both. I'm simply saying there's a second level look at it. But yes, what you're describing is totally right. And yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking of Elon Musk. He is creating this future that we all read about in Heinlein, Ray Bradbury. He's like making it real, but he's inspired by, so it's...
Or were they inspired by him?
Yeah, so it raises these kinds of questions. Yeah, but it's totally true. I love, though, okay, so getting back to the shaman, though, like what you're saying really crystallized something for me, because I think there's this way in which we think, we tend to think of the shaman as simply working within this other worldview of this culture, this other belief system of this culture. But what if, no, they're always transgressive of that culture and always on the margins of that culture? So the things that we associate with shamans and their experiences and their practices are never part of the mainstream worldview of the culture of their time.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I forget and that the people thinking about shamans forget. And so that's hugely important. And it raises all kinds of questions that I certainly didn't go into in this book, but about the healing properties of that transgression, at healing properties of going beyond whatever the frame happens to be, transgressing that frame. What are the healing properties of that? Because that's their function in a sense. I think a huge.
But also, you could even say, then what is the relationship between art and culture? I don't think art has anything to do with culture. It's impossible to make sense of that fully because art always gets immediately, always already reintegrated into culture, right? But the artistic moment, the moment of creation, even though it's using materials that culture has produced, it's always a little bit outside of culture. Just like dreams, are dreams cultural products or natural products? Are they the work of nature or the work of culture? They're both. They use cultural motifs, cultural forms, they use language, they use things that we're familiar with. You might dream of an airplane, you might dream of Christmas time, whatever. The point is but dreaming will happen no matter what. And the real power that dreams pack isn't in the content of any particular dream, but in what dreaming allows in terms of, I don't know, if you adopt a kind of psychoanalytic view of dreams, or dreams are revealing things that aren't yet manifest, the dreaming does that naturally. It's not because of culture that it does that. So you don't understand what I'm saying? So just as the shaman doesn't really belong to the traditional culture that we associate them with, even though in many cases we primarily imagine a lot of prehistoric cultures by starting with the shaman. Oh, this is how the religions work. And but really the shaman...
This is what they believe.
But the shaman was always the one standing on the edge or with one foot outside of that culture. And that would be one way of explaining the universalism of shamanism across all different cultures. Because if it's simply a structural function, it's going to manifest in very much the same way in any particular group, no matter what the culture is. It's a structural function. It's not a contingent innovation that happens to have occurred in all these different cultures, right?
That's wonderful. That's fascinating.
I had never thought of it that way in terms of the shaman. That's really brilliant. Thanks for bringing that up. That's cool. I don't know.
Thanks for it's gotten me really thinking.
To run it by some anthropologists and see what they think.
I'm technically an anthropologist.
Right.
That's what my PhD.
I knew that. Okay, then I'll take it as a.
I said goodbye to anthropology students. I got my PhDs.
Okay.
On Valis, with a quote from Jacques Vallée, when this irreversible learning is achieved, the UFO phenomenon may go away entirely, or it may assume some suitable representation on a human scale. The angels may land downtown. And then the last thing I want to say about this is, I was like, the funny thing about this was that it was so disappointing. I was like, this is what I was waiting 17 years for? And then, of course, you can't talk about this without telling your own story. I'll leave it to you to whether or not you want to go into this in more detail, but I just think it's funny that your own UFO investigations began with you writing this satire about how a UFO turned out to be a flying blender. And then you're at Esalen, and UFO historian Greg Bishop gives a PowerPoint presentation on the surreality of UFO encounters and concludes with the observation that they may manifest as virtually anything, including a flying blender. What's a drone? A flying blender. And I was just like, is this what Terence McKenna meant by immanentizing the eschaton? Is this like the point is to make it boring? And again, that's like to that point of the high form and the low form, and there being a trend from the sort of shamanic space into the mundane at the center of the clockwork of society.
It's a long story, but there's a book in the screenplay that these children were reading called The Heart of the Forest. And one day I was just happened to find in my own house, my wife had found a box of books and I'm just emptying it. And there's The Heart of the Forest. And it was like a red book, just like in my screenplay. And I opened it, was like the lamest, most boring book. But who knows? The problem is that this is why that even if it's time loops, right? Even if, for example, the 833 thing you saw in your dream was simply this moment, this random ass moment you're with your daughter against your will in this place surrounded by cops looking at the sky. That's just the drones, and 833 is just one of it's just they're counting down. But to me, this is why I think we need a fifth beyond the four causes of Aristotle. We need a fifth. There's a resonance there. What do you do with that? When I started doing weird studies, Phil and I were talking a lot about magic. Phil Ford and I, who do the podcast together, talking a lot about magic. And I hadn't done any magic since my 20s because I had some pretty bad experiences doing chaos magic when I was young, or at least some blowback or bounce back when things start to go the other way. So I stopped doing that, but I was still interested in it. But I decided, okay, we're talking about it all the time. I'm going to try a quick sigil working. So I do a sigil, and of course I ask for a large sum of money. So if I make a sigil out of the phrase, I receive a large sum of money. And the next day, I've actually put this check with the identifiers blurred out online so people could see. I'm not joking. The next day, I get a check in the mail, and it's from the property management company that takes care of where I live. And I open it and I see this check, and the check is for $18.37. But on the line where you write the amount, they've written in large, like PT mono font, super big, the sum. It's written in huge letters, and then the amount, the sum, a large sum. And it happened the next day. So then the whole conversation we're having was like, okay, so assuming this is a hit, assuming this worked, well, what did I do? Did I retrocausally force an accountant to write me a check 2 days in the past? Like he was doing something else. All of a sudden he felt this great compulsion to write me a random check. It was like some kind of return on my investment on the first month of rent or whatever. Or is it that I was simply somehow inspired, as you say, to ask for that, just knowing on some level that tomorrow I'm going to get a check with this absurdly largely written sum on it. Anyways, so but at the same time, then you have to think about what are the symbolic affordances of this beyond the one-to-one semiotic message that I'm hoping this synchronicity will give me. What does it imply? Why 1837? Turns out 1837 was the year Wagner got arrested. I remember checking that out. And then that took me down. And you can do things with these things, even if they're seemingly meaningless, you can create with them, you can work with them, you can explore them. And I think that spirit of exploration and creative engagement is very much obviously present both in what you're saying in your book, but also in how you made this book. Like, it's an amazing feat to have written this book. It's a wonderful book. And to me, it just inspires what it does more than, and it's true that and I really like this aspect of your work, Eric, is that you really know how to make your reader feel like the dreadfulness of mystery, right? The kind of, I don't want to say the dark side, but the sublime in its most actually sublime meaning. But what I feel the most when I'm reading your work is just this sense of, wow, how crazy could it all be? Like how, if we just allow ourselves to notice the things that we choose to conveniently omit, how weird does reality get? And it gets really weird. And yet it remains thinkable. It invites and rewards creative engagement. And I think that maybe that attitude applied to synchronicities, even if they turn out to simply be remembered incidents in the future, can still generate a wonder for us and engagement and create creative action, perhaps. I don't know.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, it reminds us that we're the ones making the meaning, and we can make the meaning if we choose to.
Yeah.
Can I just add that 833 as a piece of music emerged as the coda to a song called You Don't Have to Move, within which the chorus is a line that was given to me by who knows, the UFOs that I saw on the lake the last time I saw them in 2007, where they said to me specifically, and this gets back to your piece about science and where science fits in all of this. They said, angels appear when you stop trying to prove them.